Trust fall. Why didn't you catch me? This simple team building activity can tell you how much you trust in someone. Either they're going to catch you when you fall, or expect a large thump when you hit the concrete floor. It's the same thing with rock climbing. If you're not bouldering or free climbing, you have someone on the ground holding tightly onto your rope. That person is called the belayer. As you ascend upwards towards the rock, the person continues to pull down your rope, so that if by any chance you slip and fall, they will catch you before you hit the floor. You trust that person with your life. Trust fall, rock climbing, they both teach you an important lesson when it comes to our faith in God. You must be willing to put your whole life in the hands of God. One example of this principle play out is in the story of Abraham. In Genesis 12, God promises Abraham that he will be a great nation with many descendants and land. Abraham believed in God's promise. But did he fully trust him? In the very first story of Abraham, we see him lying to Pharaoh, claiming that Sarah is not his wife, but his sister. Instead of believing that God will protect him, he believed in his own power and his own works that he will be safe. Then in Genesis 16, Abraham and Sarah are much older now. They're now in their 80s. But they have been able to receive the land that God promised. But yet, no descendants. How can Abraham be a great nation without any sons? Well, they took matters in their own hands. Instead of waiting for God to bless them, Sarah gave Hagar, her maidservant, to Abraham. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Sure enough, no surprise, Hagar became pregnant with a son named Ishmael. Now Abraham and Sarah are celebrating because they now have a son. God has blessed them. When in reality, they only trusted in their own power and them working their way to the promise. God didn't plan it to be this way. God planned for Abraham and Sarah to fully trust in God's plan. While God had seen enough of their unfaithfulness and makes Abraham do the unthinkable. In Genesis 17, God said to Abraham, "As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." Wait. What? What did God say? Let's put this into context. God is asking Abraham and the rest of the camp of all the males to cut the foreskin of their genitalia. They did not have any antiseptic ointment. None of their equipment they used to cut the foreskin is sterile and clean. This procedure could very well be risky to one's life. Why is God asking Abraham to do this? And this is the reason why. God is saying to Abraham, "Look, Abraham, you have been doing it your way your entire life. You have been trusting in your own powers. For too long you have been working your way to my promise. But it doesn't work that way. I will fulfill my promise in you. And I'm going to show you that despite your age, and despite the marring of your genitalia, I can make the impossible possible. You will have a son, and you will realize it will not be from your power and your works, but from me. Abraham believed in God, and sure enough, the impossible happened. Abraham, who was 100 years old, and Sarah, who is now 90 years old, became parents to a son named Isaac. All of the heartache, all of the pain could have been avoided if they only trusted in God's works. You know, this story and many others can be found in the Bible of people trusting in their own power and in their own works rather than God. Adam and Eve disobeyed God's one command in the Garden of Eden. Lot's wife desiring to go back to immorality by looking back into Sodom and Gomorrah and turning into a pillar of salt. The Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 days before reaching the promised land. Rebekah devising a plan to steal the birthright for Jacob. When it comes to Abraham, Ishmael cannot be the promised child because it is through their own power and through their own works. Here's the God-centered truth. It's not about working our way to His promise. It's about putting our full faith that what God promises, He will fulfill. And the circumcision that God asked of Abraham is a constant reminder that it's not by your own works, but through me, God, that He can do the impossible possible. That's why in the New Testament, Paul makes the spiritual application that it's not no more the physical circumcision, but the circumcision of the heart. For he is not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. To be a child of God, according to Paul, is to make the changes in the heart. All of our works are outward. But to have a changed, converted life must happen from the inside out, not the other way around. Paul is using the idea of the physical circumcision to remind us that we need to be circumcised in our hearts. That it's not about what I can do, but what God can do through me. It is impossible to save ourselves through our works. Our salvation rests on God and God alone. So when you're falling in life and your feet is not under you anymore, fearing for that moment when everything will come crashing down on you. But fear not, because God is right behind you. The question I leave with you today is this: are you willing to trust your whole life to God? Because when you're falling, He's right behind you with the arms wide open, ready to catch you when you fall.